All right, let's jump right in. Today, in this explainer, we're journeying into the incredibly dark, dramatic, and just wildly complex history of a man who literally single-handedly defined an entire era of Iranian history. We're looking at the life, the reign, and the intensely debated legacy of Agha Mohammad Khan Qajar. Drawing from our source texts and documentaries, we're going to get a comprehensive picture of a ruler whose impact people are still fiercely arguing about today. So get ready, because this is a story about unbreakable patience, staggering ruthlessness, and the absolute heavy price of power. Okay, let's dive into this. The entire historical debate surrounding Agha Mohammad Khan Qajar basically boils down to one monumental question. Was he a brutal tyrant, or was he a political genius who saved Iran from total collapse? Because after the death of Nader Shah, the region was in absolute chaos. It was completely fractured into competing territories. Out of those ashes, Agha Mohammad Khan rose up and actually stitched the country back together. But, as we'll see, the methods he used to do that were genuinely terrifying. To really understand him, we have to neutrally examine the absolute dichotomy of his legacy. On one hand, you've got this monumental achievement of unifying a fractured nation. He ended decades of civil war that had utterly devastated the Iranian plateau, and he established a dynasty that lasted for over a century. But then, on the other hand, you have the horrifying human cost of that unification, particularly the atrocities committed in places like Kerman and Georgia. It's a stark reality. Putting the country back together came at an almost unimaginable price in human suffering. But before we can understand the ruler, we have to look at the psychological foundation of his ruthless political calculations. We need to look at his early life. His story kicks off in 1742, but his life was violently upended when he was just 6 years old. At age 6, he was captured and castrated by a rival faction leader, Adel Shah Afshar. Imagine the sheer trauma of that for a child. He then ended up spending 20 long years as a captive hostage under Karim Khan Zand down in Shiraz. But here's the thing, he wasn't just sitting idle. This traumatized captive silently learned the art of statecraft and, frankly, vengeance. The historical sources share this chilling detail. While living in the Zand palace, he would secretly cut their beautiful carpets with a hidden blade. He was silently venting this boiling anger, all while flawlessly playing the role of a perfectly compliant hostage. And honestly, this quote brilliantly illustrates his cold, calculating worldview. When Karim Khan Zand reportedly asked him for advice on how to rule the region, Agha Mohammad Khan delivered this exact assessment. Iran is like a stubborn mule. You cannot ride it without cleverness and tact. He didn't view the nation as a people to be loved. He saw it as a dangerous animal that had to be broken and controlled through absolute cunning. That perspective was forged during those 2 decades of captive observation, where he just watched, learned his captor's weaknesses, and meticulously plotted his rise. Well, the waiting finally ended with the death of Karim Khan Zand. The moment he had spent 20 years preparing for had arrived. The hostage was about to become the hunter. The way he moved was incredibly rapid and highly calculated. Right after hearing about Karim Khan's death, he bolts from Shiraz, pretending he's just going on a hunting trip. He makes his way to his ancestral homeland in the north and miraculously manages to unify the fractured Qajar tribes, shutting down their internal disputes. Then, with the unified army behind him, he systematically conquers key cities like Tehran and Isfahan, relentlessly hunting down the remnants of the Zand dynasty. He just entirely capitalized on the chaos of his rivals. Now, as we look at how he consolidated his empire, we have to face the historical facts with total impartiality. The price of this power was steeped in blood, 20,000. Just let that staggering number sink in for a second, because it represents one of the darkest moments in Iranian history. When the city of Kerman sheltered his ultimate rival, the young Lotfuli Khan Zand, Agha Mohammad Khan besieged the city. And when he captured it, he ordered his men to extract the eyes of the city's defenders and citizens. 20,000 pairs of eyes were reportedly brought to him. It was a brutally unforgettable message to anyone even thinking about defying him. So the crucial point is that these acts were not merely random madness. They were his terrifying, systematic method of extracting wealth and permanently eliminating opposition. Take Lotf Ali Khan Zand. After capturing him, Agha Mohammad Khan didn't just execute him. He had the young rival blinded, tortured, and then killed. Later, he went after Shahrukh Shah of Shar specifically to find the lost treasures of Nader Shah. He subjected Shahrukh to horrifying torture, actually pouring molten lead on his head, just to force him to surrender hidden jewels, including the famous Darya-Unor diamond. His cruelty was entirely methodical. But if we shift our focus away from his brutal conquests, we see another, very different side of his rule: his incredibly effective, cold-blooded state building. He knew that conquering an empire was really only half the battle, right? Ensuring it survived after his death was the real challenge. So he established a robust, centralized administrative bureaucracy. But more shockingly, he preemptively eliminated succession threats. Because he couldn't have children himself, he chose his nephew, Fats Ali, as his heir. And to make absolutely sure Fats Ali wouldn't face a civil war, Agha Mohammad Khan did something staggering. He murdered his own brother, Jafar Qoli Khan. Now, this was his most loyal, heroic general, but he was killed simply because his ambition might, one day, threaten the chosen heir. It's a brutal political logic. Sacrifice your favorite brother today to save the empire from a civil war tomorrow. Now, after surviving decades of war, assassination attempts, and intense political intrigue, you would probably expect a ruler like this to meet some grand, dramatic end. Instead, the circumstances of his assassination are almost entirely absurd. Three servants, that is literally all it took to undo him. While he was encamped at Shusha during a military campaign in the Caucasus, Agha Mohammad Khan noticed that a portion of his royal melon had been eaten. He found out 3 of his servants did it, and for this incredibly minor offense, the Shah sentenced all 3 of them to death. Let's move to and see how this builds, because it is a masterpiece of supreme irony. Thursday night, the melon is eaten, and the death sentence is passed. But because Friday is a holy day, the Shah decides, you know what, let's delay the execution until Saturday morning. Unbelievably, he then allows the 3 condemned men to just continue their normal duties in his camp on Friday, knowing they're going to be executed the very next morning. The doomed servants creep into the Shah's tent on Friday night and assassinate the sleeping ruler. A man who survived the collapse of entire empires was undone by a petty dispute over fruit and a poorly timed religious delay. You can't make this stuff up. The aftermath in the camp the next day was total chaos. But our sources give us this incredibly dark, poetic detail about his personal book reader. Now, this was a guy whose job was to read the Shah to sleep every night, and he lived in constant terror of making a mistake. Just hours after the assassination, with the camp in a total uproar, this nervous book reader was seen pacing the courtyard, practically out of his mind with shock, just repeatedly reciting this verse: "Worse than Shimmer and Yazid, who cut your sinister head." It just perfectly captures the psychological terror this Shah inspired, even when he was lying dead. And that brings us to the end of our explainer today. Agha Mohammad Khan Qajar leaves us with a deeply unsettling legacy. He ended an era of warlords and forged a unified Iran that lasted well into the 20th century. But he did so through terror, torture, and literal rivers of blood. So I want to leave you with this provocative thought. Does the true unification of a fractured land always require the hand of a monster? History is rarely black and white. It's usually lived in the shadows. If you want to continue uncovering these fascinating historical truths with us, make sure to subscribe to Untold Persia. Thank you for exploring these sources with me today, and keep questioning the past.